most disappointing teams so far this season. There's a few candidates that I considered here, but I'll let you get us started, Reek, on who's been your most disappointing team so far this year.
Dang. Did anybody have the Warriors written down?
I have not had the Warriors written down.
Did Gabe
Go
have the
ahead.
Warriors? No, I think I've talked about the Warriors enough, so I'll leave that to you. Um, Look, this might sound just weird because like none of us, I think, had them as like a top 10 seed out east, but it's been so bad, and it was so bad for so long. The Pistons, man, really just disappointing, surprisingly just poor season. Now, like I said, didn't expect this team to be great or anything, but I wanted to see those steps forward, kind of like the Magic last year, how we saw improvements. Like the defense was really good. We saw like Paolo, Franz, those guys getting better. Um, Markel had a good year for them last year. Like we saw those steps of improvement to where they could be competitive most nights, and they'll beat most of the bad teams, and they'll sometimes beat a good team, but maybe lose most of those games, right? I was like, okay, I don't expect the Pistons to be a playing team, but I want to see that growth. And we saw the complete opposite. We saw the longest regular season losing streak of all time in a single season. We've seen just drama between Jaden Ivey not playing, Killian Hayes getting those minutes, the rookies being kind of mismanaged and being held on a short leash for a bad team. Monty just seeming like he forgot how to coach. It was just a dumpster fire all the way around. And that's how it's been. They played okay recently. They've won some games, but I can't ignore that record losing streak. I can't ignore all of the drama, just all of the negative stuff around this team that you don't want to see from a young team that's in really a prime year of their reboot, because they've been bad for quite some time now. In a really prime year, K's third year, you want to see these guys show some type of promise. And they're in an even worse position, I think, than they were last year, personally, because last year Cade was out, so it's like, okay, we'll be the worst team in the league. This year, you've been mainly healthy for the most part. I know Dern's missed some time, but man, just utter disappointment, man. I expected a lot more from this team, even not in the sense of being in playing contention, but we just wanted to see that growth, that still steps forward. And it seems like they've taken 10 steps backwards this season, and I hate it. And it's just unwatchable basketball, and it's been that way for some months now. But that's my most disappointing team other than the Warriors, which I'll let Gabe talk about.
See, there's a lot of shots I could have had for this too. Like just looking at it, like you could talk about the Lakers because after their playoff run and their offseason acquisitions, they look pretty good. Them being 4 games over 500, not great. I could even get into like a Chicago who nobody expected them to be good, but more disappointing from the fact of like they still aren't really changing anything. It seems like their direction is just we're going to compete with what they have. So that's disappointing for Bulls fans because it's not going to get any better or really change at all, it seems. But I can go into the Warriors. And I feel like Greek kind of said, like we don't really have to go into it because we talked about it so much this season. But just the fact that it's just Curry and just a bunch of guys. The only real bright spot is Kuminga. His development and some of his play has been really nice. But everything else, just all the Draymond drama between his suspensions and just all the off-the-court issues. Klay Thompson just not barely knowing how to play, getting himself benched, always having just the worst attitude and pressers and just a terrible look. Andrew Wiggins just completely forgot how to play basketball. That's like the top 3 guys next to Curry, just all disappointing, super underperforming seasons all at the same time. And it just led to just not a good time. The only saving graces there has been bright spots. Like I said, Kuminga, Brandon Podziemski, he's looked really good over the past month or so. So, like, a lot of these young guys and a lot of these bench pieces, they look good. I'm sure the tutelage of Chris Paul being in town had to do with that. But just because their top guys have been so bad, even still being over 500, they should be way better than this. And I'll just leave it there because we talked about it too much.
really quick. This is the only thing I want to say. It's mainly about Clay being benched. Do y'all remember? I've said it multiple times on this podcast. I think I said it on Twitter, but I said basically Clay needs to assume that Ray Allen role, how he did at the end of his Boston tenure and into
Yeah.
Miami, and now he's saying he wants to embrace that. I'm just saying. It's about time. Maybe that can be actually really good for not only him but for the team too, because that can show like maybe we'll actually want to try and keep this guy around if he plays good in this role. His first game off the bench, he played great. So hopefully for his sake and for the team's sake, like that can continue because that can help really boost them and give these young guys more opportunity and more confidence too, which they deserve and they've earned because they've been playing some really good basketball. Pods, Kaminga, those guys have been great for them.
Yeah, definitely. Like they still need him to be productive to some extent, but it just can't be in the starting lineup anymore. The way he's been playing, and like you guys mentioned, the way that the young guys have been playing, they've earned that role to be able to go into the starting lineup, and they've just simply been better at the end of the day. I could have went a few different directions with this. The Bulls were one of the teams I had on my short list as well, Gabe, for similar reasons. I give them a slight pass on Zach LaVine not getting traded, thanks to his unfortunate injury. DeMar not being traded going into a year where he's going to be a free agent. Baffling, but it's the Bulls front office. I shouldn't be surprised anymore. The direction I went here was the team that I was by far the highest on any of the three of us going into the season. And again, similar to the Pistons, they weren't expected to be great. They've just been really bad, and it's the Charlotte Hornets. Really disappointing from them this year. Now, of course, they've dealt with injuries as well. Mark Williams has been missing a significant amount of time. Still unclear when he's going to be back healthy, ready to go. LaMelo, of course, has continued to miss time. And these were the types of things we did bring up when we talked about them before the season was there's injury concerns. How available are they going to be, and how can that affect them? Of course, they've now moved off of Tyrik Rozier as well. But as a unit, this team just wasn't as good as they should have been, even with some of the injuries. Like it's still Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, PJ Washington pre-trade. Cody Martin was back in the lineup now the last couple of months, and he's been playing fine. But as a collective, it just hasn't been working. The defense has been woeful. Miles Bridges is someone who I almost considered on my most disappointing player list that we're going to get to shortly. And counting stat-wise, he's been playing great. But like it just doesn't look like he cares, and that's a lot of this basketball team right now. Is it just looks like a bunch of dudes out there playing basketball by themselves, and it's tough to watch. Trey Mann being there is good to see now, and he's had a good first couple of games in town since he was traded. But ultimately, as a unit, it just looks like, again, similar to Detroit, they're just taking steps back, and it looks like they're not really getting anywhere. They've shown flashes, and of course, when LaMelo's healthy, they have more of a chance. But even when he's been healthy, they've still just been bad. Tough to see for them. Of course, they've only were a couple of years removed from the play-in, and now they've just fallen back to where they are. Not quite as much of a panic button maybe as Detroit, considering they had that significant losing streak, and they're now year 5 of their rebuild, and they're taking steps back as opposed to forward. And year 5 is ideally the year you like to be exiting your rebuild. But considering the Hornets have what they thought was going to be their push into at least being a play-in regular, even if they're just at the level of the Hawks from where they were a couple of years ago, they look like they might be in a bit of a situation where they're going to have to make some changes and try to retool to get themselves back into at least being in the play-in over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it starts with the coaching change that hopefully happens this offseason. They're one of those organizations, and could have had the Brooklyn Nets on this list too, because they're a dumpster fire of an organization, but that really goes back like a decade of them just making bad choice after bad choice. But I think it's kind of the same with the Hornets, man. It's just kind of top to bottom. Like the whole entire organization is just kind of in a state of flux where, it's coaching hires or it's front office decisions or ownership decisions. Like it's just a whole bunch of different things that have kind of plagued this team. And then it doesn't help that 2 of your most promising young players, LaMelo and Mark Williams, have both dealt with injuries. And LaMelo,
they're 2 good draft picks.
Yeah, they're 2 only good draft picks. And also those guys are, or LaMelo's case, like this is like continuing for him. It seems like every year he's dealing with some type of ankle injury or some type of injury, right? And then you got Book Knight, who I thought he was a really good prospect. And, basically after his rookie year where he played a handful of games, looked decent in some of them, basically out the league pretty much. Like it's just kind of pitiful, man. And it's kind of recurring for them. So I understand that frustration. And like you said, weren't expecting them to be great, but definitely looked at them as a team that if things go right, they're healthy, their young talent continues to grow, they could be a competitive bad team, and they're not even really that. And there's a lot of things that factor into it, but just it seems like that's kind of a trend with them. It's a trend with the Brooklyn Nets. It's a trend with a lot of bad teams, and I think that's just the whole top to bottom thing with the new organization.
Yeah, they have talent, but putting it together has just been a mess. I remember the first couple weeks of the season, just how good LaMelo was playing. He was really like close to entering that echelon, and probably honestly, he is in that echelon of like the Halliburtons of the world, the Brunson of the world, like pretty close to like a Trae Young. Like he's of that level. He just deals with injuries so much, but for how good he was playing before he got hurt, and even when he came back for a little bit, I just wish he was able to see the court more, because I think that would be one step in just making this team way better. But even beyond that, like you guys said, with the coaching change, it's going to have to take some sort of just organizational, structural change as a whole to get this team anywhere. Because let's be real, since they came back as the Bobcats in like, 04, they haven't really done much of anything.
And they haven't won a playoff series.
Even if that's like the newest franchise in the league, still like the round before them, like the Raptors and Grizzlies, the Raptors have a championship. The Grizzlies, they've been to some conference finals. Like other expansion teams, like by this point, you should at least have something to your name. But
the Heat have championships.
The Heat have a lot. They're newer. Orlando, they're kind of newer. They don't have championships, but Orlando's been to finals multiple times.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, Gabe.
But it's like, yeah, they just I don't know what's going to go on with this franchise. But it's like you look at the talent, it's like there is a lot to like. But like Devin was kind of talking about, it's just not a good product. I'm a Brandon Miller enjoyer. I'm a LaMelo enjoyer. Mark Williams would have good impact if he, like, it's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah. It's frustrating to see, especially when you consider the fact that like they have what should be the basis of at least a competitive team. Like they have their elite guard, and they have what looks to be an elite wing. Future to grow, obviously, neither are near their prime. Miller, of course, only a rookie. He's nowhere near that. They're still 3, 4, 5 years down the road from that. But even still, it's hard to look at that duo right now. And between the mismanagement in the front office, the current coaching, and health, you still can't look at that duo and just say they're going to be a surefire, really competitive duo in the Eastern Conference in 4 to 5 years. And that's difficult because that talent should indicate it, but everything else about the organization currently does not, and the health of LaMelo certainly doesn't help it either.
This ain't the same Eastern Conference, man. Like, you talk about your top duo, Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan aren't competing for nothing. Trae Young and now it's DeJounte Murray. I guess before it was like Trae Young and like John Collins. Trae Young and DeJounte, they're not competing for nothing. Those are pretty talented duos on paper. Even like before the trade, Pascal and Scotty Barnes, 2 very talented players, not competing for anything. So this ain't the same Eastern Conference. Like you have to have more than just a star. Like you have to have some pretty solid team construction, top to bottom, to actually do something.
And the teams that are consistently good, like you can't look at them and be like, that's a bad organization. For the most part, it takes levels to it, man. It's like you said, it's more than just talent, and you can't just look at the 2 good draft picks that they have had or the 3 good picks that they've had and be like, that's enough to trump this, bad coaching, bad management, bad ownership. Like that's enough. Like it's not. So they need to go through a deep cleanse, tear it down from the bottom all the way up to the top.